There is a specific kind of comfort that comes from watching a number sit still. You open your banking app and the balance is exactly where you left it. Nothing has moved. Nothing has moved. In a world of falling markets and rising prices, that stillness feels like the one honest thing left, a fixed point you can trust, and that feeling is real. But it may also be the most expensive illusion in modern personal finance, because while that number holds perfectly still, something underneath it is moving. Quietly. Constantly. In a direction that almost never shows up on the screen you're looking at. This is the strange paradox at the heart of holding cash. It is the safest feeling asset most Americans will ever own, and at the same time it can be one of the slowest, most patient ways to lose. Not lose in the dramatic sense, not a crash, not a wipeout, nothing you could point to and say there, that's the moment it happened. It's a different kind of loss. The kind that doesn't announce itself. The kind you only notice years later when you realize the same paycheck buys less, the same savings stretch shorter, and the safety you were counting on is quietly thinned out beneath your feet. Ray Dalio, who spent decades studying how debt, currencies, and entire economies rise and decay, has returned to one idea again and again, that cash, the thing people instinctively run toward when they're afraid, is often the very thing being drained the fastest. Not because someone is stealing it, because of how the system is built. And to understand why the safest feeling choice can also be the quietly weakening one, you have to look past the balance and into the machinery underneath it. So here's the question this whole story turns on. If the number in your account never goes down, how can you possibly be losing? The answer is the difference between two things almost nobody separates in their mind: the amount of money you have and the power of that money. Those are not the same thing, and once you see the gap between them, you can't unsee it. Start with the part everyone has felt but few have named. Money is not valuable because of the paper or the digits. It's valuable because of what it can command. The groceries, the rent, the tank of gas, the doctor's visit, the plane ticket home. That commanding power is the real substance of money. The number is just the label on the bottle. And here's the uncomfortable truth. The label can stay the same while the bottle slowly empties. You can have the exact same $10,000 you had a few years ago, and that $10,000 can quietly lose its grip on the things you actually need. Same number. Less power. That's the trick your banking app can't show you because the app only tracks the label, never the contents. The name we usually give this is inflation, and most people think they understand it. They picture prices going up. But that framing hides the more important half of the story. When prices rise, it isn't only that things cost more, it's that your dollars are worth less. Those are two ways of describing the same event, but they point your attention in opposite directions. Prices went up makes it sound like the world did something to the store. My dollars lost value makes it clear the erosion is happening inside the money you're holding, and that second framing is the one that matters because it means the cash sitting still in your account is not neutral. It is not simply waiting for you. It is quietly leaking value the entire time it sits there, whether you touch it or not. Now here's where the feeling of safety becomes genuinely dangerous. Not because cash is bad, but because the danger is invisible. When a stock drops, you feel it. The number turns red. Your stomach tightens. The loss is loud, and because it's loud, you respond to it. You pay attention, but the erosion of cash is silent. There is no red number. There is no bad day. There is only a slow, patient drift that never triggers the part of your brain built to notice threats. Human beings are wired to react to sudden loss and to completely ignore gradual loss. And cash exploits that wiring perfectly. It hurts you in the exact way you're least equipped to notice. Think about what that means over a long stretch of time. Someone who is careful, who avoids risk, who keeps their savings in cash precisely because they don't want to gamble. That person can do everything right by their own definition and still watch their real wealth shrink year after year. Not through any mistake, through inaction that felt like wisdom. That's the cruel part. The behavior that feels most responsible can quietly produce one of the slowest financial declines available to an ordinary saver. And because it feels responsible, they keep doing it, sometimes for decades. But if this were the whole story, it would just be a lesson about inflation, and you've heard that before. The reason this goes deeper is that inflation isn't a weather event. It isn't random. It isn't just prices being high this year. There is a mechanism underneath it, and the mechanism is where the real story lives. Here is the layer most people never reach. The value of a currency is tied to how much of it exists and how much the world trusts it. When a country runs large deficits year after year, spending far more than it takes in, it has to finance that gap. It does this by borrowing, by issuing more debt, and over long enough periods, by allowing more money to enter the system than the underlying economy is actually producing in real goods and services. When there is more money chasing a similar amount of real stuff, each unit of money commands a little less of that stuff. That's not a conspiracy. It's arithmetic. And it's the arithmetic that quietly sits underneath every dollar in your account. This is the pattern Dalio has spent years tracing across history. The way heavily indebted nations tend to deal with debt they can't easily repay. There are only a few paths available to any government in that position. It can raise taxes dramatically, which is politically painful. It can cut spending dramatically, which is also politically painful. It can default outright, which is catastrophic and rare for a country that borrows in its own currency. Or it can take the quietest path of all, let the money itself gradually lose value over time, so that old debts become easier to repay in cheaper dollars. That last option is the one that almost never makes headlines, because it doesn't happen on any single day. It happens across years. And the people who bear the cost of it are, more than anyone, the people holding cash and holding long-term promises denominated in that cash. Sit with that for a moment because it reframes everything. If a system under enough pressure tends to resolve its debts by quietly reducing the value of its currency, then holding large amounts of that currency is not a neutral act. You are, in effect, standing in the exact spot where the pressure gets released. The saver who did nothing risky becomes one of the quiet payers of the bill they never agreed to and were never told about, not through force, through the slow mechanics of how money works when a country owes more than it can comfortably carry. And this is the part that separates how ordinary savers think from how the largest players in the world think. When someone with enormous wealth looks at cash, they generally don't see safety at all. They see a melting asset. They see something that is guaranteed, by design, to lose a little of its purchasing power over time. To them, holding a mountain of cash isn't caution. It's a slow leak they have to manage. So they don't sit in it. They move it into things they believe will hold or grow their purchasing power. Productive businesses, real assets, and yes, sometimes hard assets like gold that have served as a store of value across centuries, precisely because no government can print them into existence. The point here isn't that any one of those things is right for you. It's that the people with the most resources and the best information often treat cash as the thing to move out of, while the ordinary saver treats it as the thing to run into. That gap in perception is one of the quietest wealth divides in the country, and almost no one talks about it out loud. Now let's bring this all the way down to the kitchen table, because macroeconomics only matters when it lands on a real person's life. Picture someone who has saved diligently for 30 years and is about to retire. They've built up what looks like a solid cushion. The number's real, and they earned every dollar of it. But that cushion has to last potentially for 2 or 3 decades. And over that span of time, the quiet erosion we've been describing doesn't stay quiet. It compounds. A cost of living that rises steadily year after year can slowly hollow out the buying power of that fixed pile of cash. The retiree isn't spending recklessly. They're not making bad trades. They're simply holding the way they were always told was safe, and the ground moves under them anyway. For that person, the risk was never a crash. The risk was standing still, while the value of standing still quietly decayed. Or think about a younger worker who is scared of the market, and understandably so, after watching volatility whipsaw people who thought they knew what they were doing. So they keep everything in savings. They feel prudent. They feel protected. But over 10 or 20 years, that protection can cost them enormous ground because they've chosen the one path that guarantees slow erosion in exchange for the feeling of avoiding sudden loss. They traded a visible risk they were afraid of for an invisible one they never learned to see. And the invisible one, over a long enough horizon, can do more damage than the crash they were trying to dodge. This is the deeper meaning behind the title, and it's worth stating plainly. The feeling of safety and the fact of safety are two different things, and cash is where they most quietly split apart. Cash feels safe because the number holds. Cash is risky in the specific way that matters most over time, because the power behind that number can erode. When those two things drift apart, the feeling of safety and the reality of it, that gap is exactly where quiet losses live. Not dramatic losses, quiet ones, the kind that never makes you flinch, which is precisely why they're so effective. But there's one more layer, and it might be the most important of all, because it's the one that turns this from a warning into something useful. The purpose of understanding all this is not to make you afraid of cash. Cash has a genuine and vital role. It's your buffer against emergencies. It's your ability to sleep at night. It's the reason you don't have to sell something at the worst possible moment just to cover a surprise expense. Cash is the thing that keeps a bad month from becoming a financial catastrophe, and no thoughtful person would tell you to abandon it. The problem was never cash itself. The problem is misunderstanding what cash is for. Cash is a fantastic tool for short-term stability. It is a poor tool for long-term storage. Those are two completely different jobs, and the quiet damage happens when people use the tool built for one job to do the other. They take the thing designed to protect them for the next 6 months and ask it to protect them for the next 30 years, and it simply isn't built for that. It was never built for that. Expecting it to hold your future intact across decades is like expecting ice to stay frozen just because you left it in a nice container. The container isn't the issue. Time is. So the real shift isn't about fear. It's about seeing clearly. It's about understanding that when you hold cash, you're not pausing the gain. You're making an active choice with real consequences, the same as any other choice. Doing nothing is not neutral. Standing still is not free. Once you understand that, you stop mistaking stillness for safety, and you start asking the harder, more honest question, not how do I avoid all risk, but which risks am I actually taking, including the ones that don't announce themselves. Because the risks that don't announce themselves are usually the ones that do the most damage over a lifetime, precisely because no one ever forces you to confront them. And that brings us back to that quiet moment at the beginning. You, your phone, the balance, sitting perfectly still. That stillness isn't a lie exactly. The number really is holding. But now you know what the number can't tell you. You know there's a second reading happening underneath it, a measure of power rather than amount. And that second reading almost never sits still. It drifts, sometimes slowly, sometimes faster, but rarely in your favor when the pressures on a currency are building. The people who understand this don't panic about it. They just refuse to be fooled by the stillness. They look at cash and see it for exactly what it is, useful, necessary, and quietly temporary, instead of mistaking it for a permanent shelter it was never designed to be. That single shift in perception, from watching the number to understanding the power behind it, is one of the most valuable things any ordinary person can learn about money. It doesn't require you to become an expert. It doesn't require you to take wild risks. It just requires you to stop trusting the stillness blindly and start seeing the machinery underneath it, because the machinery has been running the whole time. In every quiet moment you thought nothing was happening. Nothing feels like the safest state in the world. But in the story of money, nothing is almost never actually still. If this pulled back a curtain you hadn't looked behind before, then stay with this channel, because pulling back that curtain is exactly what we do here. Taking the financial forces that shape your everyday life and making the hidden mechanics of them visible, one layer at a time. Subscribe if you want to keep seeing the machinery most people never notice until it's already moved against them. And before you go, leave a comment with your honest take on this one question. Has playing it safe with money ever quietly cost you more than taking a risk ever did? Read what others say, add your own perspective, and let's think through it together. Because the more of us who learn to see past the stillness, the harder it becomes for any of us to be quietly caught off guard.